The river's roar drowned out Eleanor Whittaker's desperate screams as her horse, spooked by a rattlesnake, plunged recklessly into the swollen waters of the Cimarron. It was spring of 1875, and the normally placid river had transformed into a raging torrent after weeks of heavy rainfall in the New Mexico territory. "Help!" she cried out, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. Her boots were still caught in the stirrups as her panic-stricken palomino dragged her deeper into the current. The cold water shocked her system, her heavy riding skirt quickly becoming waterlogged, pulling her under. Yates Lockwood had been tracking a small herd of wild mustangs along the riverbank when he heard the commotion. Turning his stallion around, he spotted the woman's predicament immediately. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward along the bank, keeping pace with the current. "Hold on, I'm right here," he shouted, his deep voice carrying across the water as he raced alongside the river. He could see the terror in her eyes as she struggled to keep her head above the churning waters. Eleanor's fingers were growing numb from their death grip on the saddle horn, but she refused to let go. The horse continued to thrash, its eyes wide with fear as it fought against the powerful current. Each time she managed to break the surface, she caught glimpses of the man on horseback following along the riverbank. Yates assessed the situation quickly. The river bent sharply about 50 yards ahead, creating a natural eddy where the current slowed. If he could reach that point before her, he might have a chance. Digging his heels into his horse's flanks, he galloped ahead, following a path that cut across a small peninsula of land. Eleanor felt her strength waning. Her sodden clothes weighed her down, and the cold water was stealing the warmth from her body at an alarming rate. Just as she thought she couldn't hold on any longer, she felt the current shift, pushing her horse toward the riverbank where the rugged cowboy was now dismounting. Yates waded into the shallower water, bracing himself against the current. As Eleanor and her horse were swept toward him, he reached out with a lariat he had hastily uncoiled. "Grab the rope," he called out, throwing it with practiced precision. With the last of her strength, Eleanor released one hand from the saddle and lunged for the rope. Her fingers closed around the rough hemp just as her horse broke free and continued downstream. The sudden jerk nearly pulled the rope from her grasp, but Yates dug his heels into the muddy bank and held firm. Hand over hand, he pulled her toward him, fighting against the current's relentless pull. When she was close enough, he waded deeper, wrapped an arm around her waist, and half dragged, half carried her to shore. Eleanor collapsed on the riverbank, coughing up water and shivering violently. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins and hung in wet ropes around her face. Her riding habit, once a handsome forest green, now clung to her like a second skin. "My horse," she gasped between coughs. "Penny." "She'll find her way to shore," Yates assured her, though he wasn't certain of the animal's fate. "Right now, we need to get you warm." He helped her to her feet, but her legs buckled beneath her. Without a word, he swept her into his arms and carried her to where his horse waited patiently beneath a cottonwood tree. "I'm Yates Lockwood," he said as he set her down and quickly removed his duster to wrap around her trembling shoulders. "Eleanor Whittaker," she replied through chattering teeth. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Lockwood." "No need for thanks, Miss Whittaker. Anyone would have done the same." He busied himself gathering dry branches for a fire, avoiding her gaze. He wasn't used to being around women, especially not one as striking as Eleanor Whittaker, even in her bedraggled state. As Yates worked to start a fire, Eleanor took stock of her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His sandy hair was overlong, curling slightly at the nape of his neck, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, the clear blue of a summer sky, framed by lines that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. "Are you from around here?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the bone-deep chill. "Got a small spread about 10 miles east," he replied, striking his flint. Sparks flew, catching on the dry tinder. "Nothing fancy, but the grazing's good. You?" "My father purchased the old Montgomery ranch 6 months ago. We moved from Boston." She pulled his coat tighter around herself. "I was supposed to be getting acquainted with the boundaries of our property, but I'm afraid I may have strayed." "The Montgomery place." Yates looked up, surprise evident on his features. "That's nearly 15 miles from here, madam." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I've always been rather terrible with directions." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Well, you sure picked a fine day to get lost. River's higher than I've seen it in years." Once the fire had grown large enough to provide genuine warmth, Yates removed his saddlebags and produced a tin cup and a small pouch of coffee. "It ain't fancy Eastern coffee, but it'll warm you up from the inside." Eleanor watched as he prepared the drink with practiced efficiency. There was something compelling about the way he moved, economical yet graceful, like a man completely at home in his own skin and the wilderness around him. It was a far cry from the stiff-backed gentlemen of Boston society, who seemed perpetually uncomfortable in their formal attire. When he handed her the steaming cup, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her that had nothing to do with the temperature difference between them. "Thank you," she murmured, cupping her hands around the warm tin. "Your pa must be worried sick," Yates said, settling across from her. "Once you're dried out a bit, I'll take you home." "Father is in Santa Fe for the week, meeting with cattle buyers," she replied. "It's just me and the house staff at the ranch." "I doubt anyone's even noticed I'm late for supper yet." Yates frowned. "A young woman like yourself shouldn't be gallivanting across open country alone, especially in unfamiliar territory." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, Mr. Lockwood. Today was an unfortunate exception." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, stoking the fire instead. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling flames and the distant rushing of the river that had nearly claimed her life. After several minutes, Eleanor sighed. "I apologize for my sharpness. You're right, of course. It was foolish of me to ride out alone. I needed to escape the house for a while." "Escape?" Yates prompted, his blue eyes curious but not judgmental. Eleanor stared into her coffee. "Father brought me west to forget a disappointment back in Boston. He believes fresh air and new surroundings will clear my head of romantic notions." She offered a self-deprecating smile. "Instead, I find myself nearly drowning in a river." "Must have been some disappointment," Yates observed quietly. "I thought we were to be married," she admitted, surprised at her own candor with this stranger. "Charles had other ideas specifically, ideas about my best friend Margaret and the substantial dowry her father offered." Yates's expression darkened. "Sounds like you're better off without him." "That's what everyone says," Eleanor replied with a hint of bitterness. "It doesn't make the humiliation any easier to bear." "No, I reckon it wouldn't." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks skyward. "But coming west, that took courage. Not many Eastern ladies would brave the territories willingly." "It wasn't entirely my choice," she confessed, "but I've found I rather enjoy the open spaces. There's a freedom here that Boston lacks." She glanced up at him. "Do you have family nearby, Mr. Lockwood?" He shook his head. "Just me and about 60 head of cattle. Lost my folks to cholera when I was 16. Been on my own since." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. "My mother passed when I was 12. It's a special kind of loneliness, isn't it? Their eyes met across the fire, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Yates cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "Should check on the horses," he muttered, turning away. As the afternoon waned, Eleanor's clothes gradually dried in the heat of the fire. The conversation between them flowed more easily as they discovered shared interests in books and music, though their backgrounds could hardly have been more different. "You really play the pianoforte?" Yates asked, genuine interest lighting his features. "Since I was 6, she nodded. "Father had mine shipped all the way from Boston. The freight cost nearly as much as the instrument itself." "I'd like to hear you play someday," he said, then immediately looked embarrassed as though he'd overstepped. Eleanor smiled, warming to the idea. "Perhaps you shall if you're ever near our ranch." When her clothing was sufficiently dry, Yates announced it was time to start for her home. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon, and they had a long ride ahead. "What about Penny?" Eleanor asked as he helped her mount his stallion. "I can't simply abandon her." "I'll come back tomorrow and track her," Yates promised, swinging up behind her. "Most likely she'll head back to your stable on her own, but if not, I'll find her." Having never ridden double before, Eleanor was acutely aware of Yates's presence behind her, his chest solid against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. It was scandalously intimate by Boston standards. Yet out here, with nothing but open sky and empty land surrounding them, social convention seemed less important than practicality. As they rode, Yates pointed out landmarks to help her better navigate the territory in the future. His knowledge of the land was impressive. He noted which creeks ran dry in summer, which hillsides harbored rattlesnakes, and which routes were safest during different seasons. "You love it here," she observed as the sun began to set, painting the desert landscape in hues of gold and crimson. "It's in my blood," he replied simply. "Can't imagine living anywhere else." By the time they reached the Montgomery now Whittaker ranch, night had fallen completely. Lanterns blazed from the windows of the sprawling adobe-style ranch house, and Eleanor could see figures moving about, presumably searching for her. The foreman, Mr. Jenkins, rode out to meet them as they approached, relief evident on his weathered face. "Miss Eleanor." "We've had search parties out since sunset," he exclaimed, then eyed Yates suspiciously. "Who's this?" "This is Mr. Lockwood," Eleanor explained. "He saved my life today. Penny threw me into the Cimarron, and I would have drowned if not for his intervention." Jenkins's demeanor changed instantly. "We're in your debt, sir. Miss Penny came back riderless about 3 hours ago, saddle all askew, gave us quite a fright." Yates tipped his hat. "Glad the horse made it back safe." They dismounted, and Eleanor found herself reluctant to part with her rescuer. "You must stay for supper, Mr. Lockwood. It's the least we can offer after what you've done." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the invitation. "That's mighty kind, Miss Whittaker, but it's a long ride back to my place." "Then stay the night," she insisted. "We have plenty of guest rooms, and your horse needs rest as well." Jenkins nodded in agreement. "It'd be no trouble, sir, and dangerous riding these parts at night without a moon." Outnumbered, Yates acquiesced with a nod. "If you're sure it's no imposition." The house staff fussed over Eleanor once they entered, whisking her away to change into dry clothes while Jenkins showed Yates to the washroom. By the time she re-emerged in a simple blue dress, her hair neatly combed and pinned, supper was being laid out in the dining room. Yates looked transformed as well. He'd clearly washed up and made an effort to tame his unruly hair. He stood awkwardly by the dining table, his hat in his hands, looking decidedly out of place amid the fine furnishings that Eleanor's father had imported from back east. "Please sit," she encouraged, taking her place at the head of the table where her father would normally sit. Watching Yates navigate the formal table setting was both endearing and amusing. He carefully observed which fork she used and followed suit, though his large, calloused hands seemed ill-suited to the delicate silverware. "This is mighty fine food, Miss Whittaker," he said after tasting Mrs. Gunderson's beef stew. "Can't remember the last time I ate something I didn't cook myself." "You live completely alone?" she asked, finding it difficult to imagine such solitude. "Just me and the cattle," he confirmed. "And my dog, Rusty. He's guarding the place while I'm gone." "It sounds terribly lonely," Eleanor remarked without thinking. Yates considered this, then shook his head. "Never thought of it that way. I've got more company than I need when I ride into town, and the rest of the time, well, the silence has its own voice if you learn to listen." There was a poetry to his words that surprised her. This rough-hewn cowboy contained depths she hadn't expected. After supper, Eleanor suggested they retire to the parlor. "I could play something for you," she offered, gesturing toward the grand piano that dominated one corner of the room. Yates's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I'd like that very much." She seated herself at the instrument and began a gentle nocturne by Chopin. As the notes filled the room, she glanced over to find Yates watching her with such intensity that her fingers faltered momentarily on the keys. There was wonder in his expression, and something else, an appreciation that went beyond mere politeness. When she finished, he remained silent for so long that she began to worry. "Did you not enjoy it?" she asked hesitantly. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Like what angels might play if there are such things." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm at the sincerity of his compliment. "Would you like to hear another?" "If it wouldn't tire you," he replied eagerly. She played for nearly an hour, moving from classical pieces to simpler folk tunes, occasionally glancing at Yates, who sat completely entranced. When she finally stopped, her fingers aching pleasantly, the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10. "I should let you rest," Yates said, rising from his chair. "You've had quite a day." "Yes, I suppose I have," Eleanor agreed, though she was reluctant for the evening to end. "Mrs. Gunderson will have prepared the blue room for you. It's at the top of the stairs, first door on the left." "Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Whittaker." He hesitated, then added, "And for the music, I won't forget it." "Eleanor," she corrected him impulsively. "Please call me Eleanor." A slow smile spread across his face. "Only if you'll call me Yates." "Good night, Yates," she said, testing the familiarity of his name. "Good night, Eleanor," he replied, his voice softening on the syllables of her name in a way that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. The next morning, Eleanor woke earlier than usual, eager to see her rescuer again before he departed. She dressed with more care than was strictly necessary for a day at home, selecting a pale yellow dress that complemented her complexion and arranging her hair in a style that was practical yet becoming. She found Yates already in the dining room, engaged in conversation with Jenkins about cattle breeding practices. He stood when she entered, and she didn't miss the appreciation in his gaze as it swept over her. "Good morning," she greeted them both. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in years," Yates admitted. "That bed's softer than anything I've ever known." After breakfast, Jenkins excused himself to attend to ranch matters, leaving Eleanor and Yates alone. "I should be heading back," Yates said, though he made no move to leave. "Got chores waiting." "Of course," Eleanor nodded, disappointment blooming in her chest. "I can't thank you enough for what you did yesterday." He waved away her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she contradicted him gently. "Not everyone would have risked their life for a stranger." "You're a good man, Yates Lockwood." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. "Will you come back?" she asked suddenly. "Perhaps for Sunday dinner." The invitation clearly caught him off guard. "Your father might not appreciate finding a rough cowboy at his table." "My father," Eleanor said with newfound confidence, "would want to personally thank the man who saved his only daughter from drowning. Besides, he'll be back in 3 days, and I'm sure he'd enjoy discussing cattle with someone who actually understands the business." Yates considered this, then nodded slowly. "Sunday, then, if you're sure." "I'm sure," she affirmed. He left shortly afterward, but not before promising again to return. Eleanor stood on the porch watching until he disappeared from view, her thoughts a confusing tangle of emotions. For the next 3 days, Eleanor found herself constantly looking toward the eastern horizon, half expecting to see Yates riding toward the ranch. Her father returned from Santa Fe on Friday evening, bringing with him news of successful cattle contracts and gifts for his daughter. When she told him about her misadventure and subsequent rescue, Samuel Whittaker's face paled visibly. "Good heavens, Eleanor, you might have been killed." He clutched her hands tightly. "I should never have left you alone. What was I thinking?" "I'm fine, Father," she assured him. "And I've invited Mr. Lockwood for Sunday dinner so you can thank him properly." Her father raised an eyebrow. "Lockwood, not the owner of that small spread east of here," Eleanor nodded. "Do you know him?" "Only by reputation. They say he runs the healthiest cattle in the county, despite his modest holdings. Honest man, from what I hear." He studied his daughter's face closely. "He made quite an impression on you, it seems." Eleanor felt herself blushing. "He saved my life, Father." Samuel patted her hand. "Yes, of course. We'll give him a proper welcome on Sunday." Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for riding. Eleanor found herself checking the clock repeatedly throughout the morning, anticipating Yates's arrival for the noon meal. When he finally appeared, riding up the long drive precisely at 12, Eleanor had to restrain herself from rushing out to greet him. Instead, she waited in the parlor with her father, listening as Mrs. Gunderson showed their guest in. Yates had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven, and he wore what appeared to be his Sunday best, a dark wool suit that, while not fashionable by Eastern standards, was perfectly respectable. "Mr. Lockwood." Samuel Whittaker rose to greet him, extending his hand. "I understand I owe you my daughter's life." Yates shook the offered hand firmly. "It was my privilege to help, sir. Nevertheless, you have my eternal gratitude." Samuel gestured toward the sofa. "Please sit. Tell me how you came to be by the river at just the right moment." As Yates recounted the events of that day, Eleanor watched her father's reactions. Samuel Whittaker was a shrewd judge of character, and she could tell he was impressed by Yates's straightforward manner and modest account of his heroism. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with conversation flowing easily between cattle prices, local politics, and stories of Boston that seemed increasingly distant to Eleanor. Throughout the meal, she found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Yates, studying the way sunlight from the dining room windows caught in his hair or highlighted the strong lines of his profile. Once or twice, she looked up to find him watching her as well, his blue eyes warm with an emotion she dared not name. After the meal, Samuel suggested a tour of the ranch, clearly eager to show off the improvements he'd made to the property. Yates accepted with genuine interest, and the three of them spent the afternoon inspecting outbuildings, water systems, and the growing herd of Herefords that Samuel had imported at great expense. "You've got good instincts for the land, Mr. Whittaker," Yates observed as they stood on a hillside overlooking the property. Most Easterners try to force their ways on the territory instead of adapting to it. Samuel nodded, pleased by the compliment. I may be from Boston, but I've always believed in learning from those with more experience. Speaking of which, Jenkins mentioned you've had success with a new method of rotating grazing lands. As the men fell into technical discussions, Eleanor found herself content simply to observe their interaction. There was a mutual respect developing between them that warmed her heart. When evening approached and Yates announced he needed to start for home, Samuel surprised both him and Eleanor with an unexpected proposal. "Mr. Lockwood, I find myself in need of experienced help managing this place. Jenkins is a fine foreman, but I could use someone who understands both the land and the cattle business to advise me on expansion. Would you consider a position as ranch manager?" Yates blinked in surprise. "That's mighty generous, sir, but I have my own spread to tend." "Keep your land," Samuel suggested. "Use it as you see fit. But lend us your expertise here 3 days a week. I'll pay you a fair wage and you'd be welcome to take meals with us on those days." Eleanor held her breath, watching Yates consider the offer. The prospect of seeing him regularly sent a thrill of anticipation through her. "I'd need to think on it," Yates said finally. "It's a big change." "Of course," Samuel agreed. "Take a week to consider. The offer stands." When Yates departed, he promised to return with his answer the following Sunday. Eleanor walked him to his horse, slightly apart from her father. "I hope you'll accept," she said quietly, watching as he adjusted his saddle. "Do you?" His gaze was searching. "Yes," she admitted. "I've enjoyed your company." A slow smile spread across his face. "I've enjoyed yours too, Eleanor, more than I expected to." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, tipped his hat to her, and rode away. Eleanor stood watching long after he disappeared from view, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The week that followed was the longest of Eleanor's life. She threw herself into ranch activities, learning about cattle and land management with newfound enthusiasm that amused her father. "You never showed such interest in the business before," he observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "I never realized how fascinating it could be," she replied honestly. Samuel studied his daughter's face in the fading light. "It wouldn't have anything to do with a certain blue-eyed rancher, would it?" Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "Father, I'm not blind, Eleanor," he said gently. "Nor am I opposed. Mr. Lockwood seems a fine man, despite his lack of formal education or social standing. Do you truly mean that?" she asked, surprised by his acceptance. "My dear, I brought you west to heal your heart, not to isolate you from life." He patted her hand. "Besides, I've seen how you look at him, and how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Sunday arrived with agonizing slowness. Eleanor dressed with particular care, selecting a sky-blue dress that brought out the amber highlights in her eyes. She pinned up her hair, then took it down and arranged it again, dissatisfied with every attempt. "He'll think you beautiful no matter what, Mrs. Gunderson observed with a knowing smile as she passed Eleanor's open doorway. Noon came and went with no sign of Yates. By 1 o'clock, Eleanor was pacing anxiously. By 2, she was imagining all manner of terrible accidents that might have befallen him. "Perhaps he simply decided against the position," her father suggested gently. "He would have sent word," Eleanor insisted, though doubt gnawed at her confidence. At 3:30, when they had all but given up, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew them to the front porch. Yates appeared, riding hard, his horse lathered with exertion. He dismounted quickly, removing his hat as he approached. "I apologize for my tardiness," he said, addressing Samuel but glancing at Eleanor. "Had trouble with rustlers on my property last night. Took till morning to sort it out with the sheriff." "Rustlers?" Samuel exclaimed. "Were you harmed?" "No, sir. Caught them in the act and managed to hold them at gunpoint until the sheriff arrived." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Left me no time to clean up proper, though." "Never mind that," Samuel waved away his concern. "Come inside and have something to eat. You must be famished." Over a late dinner, Yates related the full story of the attempted cattle theft and its resolution. When the tale was complete, Samuel turned the conversation to the matter at hand. "Have you given any thought to my proposal, Mr. Lockwood?" Yates nodded, his expression serious. "I have, sir, and I'd like to accept with one condition." "Name it," Samuel replied. "I'd like permission to call on your daughter." Yates's gaze shifted to Eleanor, whose heart seemed to stop momentarily. "Properly, I mean, with your blessing." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. "I believe that can be arranged, provided my daughter is amenable." All eyes turned to Eleanor, who found herself momentarily speechless. She looked at Yates, saw the hope and uncertainty mingled in his expression, and found her voice at last. "I would like that very much," she said softly. The smile that transformed Yates's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert sudden, brilliant and full of promise. In the months that followed, Eleanor and Yates's courtship progressed with a natural ease that surprised them both. 3 days each week, he worked alongside her father, improving the ranch's operations and expanding its cattle business. On Sundays, he joined them for church in the small town of Cimarron, where Eleanor quickly noted the approving glances of the local women when they saw who accompanied her. Their first kiss came on a warm summer evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. It was gentle and brief, but it left Eleanor breathless with longing for more. "I never expected this," Yates confessed one afternoon in late August as they rode together across the eastern pastures. "When I pulled you from that river, I thought I was just doing what needed doing. I never imagined that you'd fall in love with a helpless eastern girl," Eleanor teased, guiding her new mare, a gentle sorrel named Ruby, alongside his stallion. "You've never been helpless," he corrected her with a grin. "Directionally challenged, perhaps, but never helpless." She laughed, the sound carrying across the open range. "Fair enough, though I've improved considerably under your tutelage." "That you have." His expression grew serious. "Eleanor, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes." "I've been saving to buy more land," he began, suddenly looking nervous. "The Peterson place, adjacent to mine, is for sale. If I acquire it, my ranch would be nearly twice its current size." "That's wonderful news," she encouraged, wondering where this was leading. "The house needs work," he continued, "but it's solid. Has 3 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, room enough for a piano if a certain lady might want to play one there." Eleanor reined her horse to a stop, her breath catching. "Yates!" He stopped beside her, reaching across to take her hand. "What I'm trying to say, Eleanor Whittaker, is that I love you. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and if you do me the great honor of becoming my wife, I'd spend the rest of my days trying to make you happy." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes. "Are you certain?" "I'm not the most practical choice for a rancher's wife. I can barely cook, and my sewing is atrocious." "I didn't fall in love with your cooking skills," he said with a tender smile. "I fell in love with your courage, your kindness, your determination. The way your eyes light up when you talk about music, the way you've embraced this land that I love so much." "Then yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Lockwood." He leaned across the space between their horses and kissed her, a kiss filled with promise and future dreams. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling so widely their cheeks ached. "We should head back," Eleanor said eventually. "Father will be wondering where we've gone." "Your father already knows," Yates admitted. "I asked his blessing last week." Eleanor's eyebrows rose, "and he gave it. Said he couldn't think of a better man to entrust with his daughter's happiness." Yates looked slightly abashed. "His words, not mine." They were married that October in the small church in Cimarron, with the entire community in attendance. Eleanor wore a cream-colored silk gown that her father had ordered specially from Denver, and Yates looked uncommonly handsome in a new black suit. Samuel Whittaker's wedding gift to the couple was a magnificent grand piano, delivered at great expense from St. Louis, and installed in the newly renovated parlor of what was now their home on the expanded Lockwood Ranch. On their wedding night, after Yates carried her over the threshold of their home, Eleanor played for her husband on that piano a love song she had composed herself during their courtship. As the final notes faded, he drew her into his arms. "I've been thinking," he murmured against her hair, "about that day by the river." "Oh," she prompted, melting into his embrace, "if your horse hadn't spooked, if you hadn't fallen in, we might never have met." His arms tightened around her. "I'm not one to believe in fate, but that day, it feels like more than chance." Eleanor lifted her face to his. "Perhaps some things are meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem. Like an Eastern lady and a rough cowboy." His eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. "Exactly like that," she affirmed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Outside their window, the Cimarron River continued its eternal journey across the New Mexico landscape. Its waters now placid and serene under the autumn moonlight, the very waters that had brought them together on that fateful spring day, when a terrified horse had pulled a young woman into danger, and a cowboy's voice had carried hope across the current. "Hold on, I'm right here."